risk analysis, risk management, there's a human factor to this. This is a big part of the human factor. If you haven't lived through the paper era, and some of you deniers out there, you probably did, but you probably weren't in school yet. They tried to avoid all risk. Disconnect from the net, I have no problems. Information was valued more than individuals. I knew I'd get another movie. U-571. Did you ever see that one? Didn't that have like John Bon Jovi in it and some cameo role or whatever? It was all World War II film, and the goal was to steal the cipher off a German submarine. And there was the name of the cipher program that the Germans used was called Enigma. And the Allied program to steal those machines so that we could reverse engineer and break their codes was called Ultra. People died on both sides of the war just to protect that technology. Now, in a couple slides, as you might guess, I'm going to flip this around. I'm going to show why people are valued more than this. That's a huge change in the human element of risk management. And obviously there were fewer users. This was probably the era that most of you were born in. Some would argue that we're still here. We're stressing man-machine interactions. We know that machines are talking to machines, but we haven't necessarily made that the focus of the architecture. Again, going back to collaborative networks. Defense Department has millions of systems and machines. A lot of things that work on a small scale don't work in millions. Not too long ago, I was given a very mundane task. Had a bit of a security concern in the military, and they wanted everybody to change their passwords. When you got 4.5 million passwords, that's not an easy task. It's a very simple task, but it's not an easy task. It doesn't scale well. So again, some of the simplest things become very hard when you have large systems. And of course, the number of systems and users we have are getting larger. Here's risk management that I queried about earlier. Everyone says that we have risk now. Everybody accepts we have risk. I would offer that if that system is connected to the internet, regardless of the filters, it's at risk. If you have enough knowledge and money, you can get to it. So this is all about managing the risk, not avoiding it. Information and individuals are more on a par in terms of the decision making. Let me put in an anecdote with regards to timing. Another university is setting up a branch campus in Qatar, the Middle East. They're building, you know what a CERT is? Computer Emergency Response Team? They're building a national CERT. The idea is, as the host nation locals matriculate through the universities, and there's 4 American universities over there. They built the whole city just to house the 4 universities. They want them to take up duty positions in this CERT that will help protect the commercial infrastructure and do all the things that we do in the United States. So I was over there in a capacity with Booz Allen to help kind of adjudicate this between the government and the universities, because they kind of needed a non-university person to kind of be an honest broker. I had run CERTs before, I knew how to do it, so they thought I was a good fit. So in the middle of all this discussion of how fast is too fast, can we expect the head of that CERT to be a host nation local in 5 years? Was that expecting too much? And we're arguing about what's a reasonable time frame. This one gentleman, very stately, he didn't say a word the 4 days prior to that, but somehow I really liked the guy. And he leaned over and he said, "I was born in a Bedouin tent." And I'm like, okay, he must not have heard, he's probably not paying attention to what we're talking about here, because that sounds like a non sequitur. Why does that have anything to do with what we're talking about? But you know, I'm the American, and I want to be sensitive to what's going on. And so I kind of paused. One of those few times in my life where I actually thought before I spoke. And then I realized, no, he's exactly on point. He's talking about how rapidly his culture is being driven into this information technology. He literally was born in a bedroom tent. Let's think about how we're moving this culture. Are our expectations too high? This is a critical thing when many of you were born in this era. Many of the decision makers, in 10 years, the paper era is going to start retiring, and you're going to be dealing with bosses from this era. We can't forget that aspect of how fast that we're trying to change. Global Information Grid, is that a new acronym? No? The GIG? The GIG is the best thing since chocolate chip cookies. Just ask any corporation, ask the federal government in the US, ask the European Union. This is going to solve all of our problems. All right? Easily 10 million users. That's just on the US federal government side. Right? They don't have ownership over the gig. It's just my clients view this as a 10 million user problem. I said, no, it's a much bigger problem than that because you don't own it. You can't control who's coming on it. Users are valued more than information. 2001, I think most of you were coherent by then. You might have recalled we had a little accident between a U.S. Navy plane and a Chinese plane off the coast of China. Do you remember that incident? And unfortunately, the Chinese plane crashed into the ocean. The Navy plane was crippled and made an emergency landing at a Chinese military facility, carrying with it highly sensitive intelligence collection equipment. Now, rewind to U-571, all right? We had skippers scuttling submarines, taking sailors with it to protect the information on the submarine. 60 years later, we have pilots landing planes in adversarial territory to save the lives of the crew members on the plane. That's a huge change in mentality. And you say, well, that's political or that's enlightened or whatever. But as information security professionals, that's part of the risk management calculus that's going on. And we have to be careful because our bosses might be in the information, the go down with the ship mentality, but we're going to be presenting trade-off analysis that says, well, the people are worth more. Anybody study for the CISSP yet, or Security Plus, or any of those kinds of certifications? Those are great on resumes, by the way. I don't make any money off of that, but believe me, it's a good way to broaden your perspective. Part of that curriculum underscores the value of human life in all of your trade-off analysis. And I guess that would, CISSP would be this portion. Any questions, objections? This is the three information security eras according to Booz. You're certainly free to have your own. I think it's important when we start looking at the trade-off analysis and the human element, like who are your bosses, who's going to be the CIO if you go to Microsoft or Oracle, what their cultural upbringing is with regards to the formative factors. It's going to be very different from yours. For example, texting. We get lots of humor. It's all over the commercials now. If I say to my generation, I sound so old. But there are more text messages sent every day than there are people on the planet. Right? Now, something's going on there. Right? Information is, I'm not going to necessarily comment on the value of that, but the same folks that we send to the Middle East to solve problems in Iraq today, they're solving some of their problems with texting. Completely unsecured, but it's awful responsive. The folks from the paper era have a hard time getting their arms around this concept of texting and this unstructured ad hoc way. But at the same time, they'll embrace a service-oriented architecture as the solution to all their problems. So, a little bit, and maybe you're being polite, service-oriented architecture. I want to try to focus now on the problem. Web services based, so everybody's going to be connected. There is no us and them. There is no British Petroleum, Shell Oil. One big happy family, right? I will produce and advertise services. I can